Welcome to the Celestial Saga channel. Are you ready to find out how humanity rose from the ashes and faced the worst enemy the cosmos has ever seen? Today we will tell the story of courage, determination, and a ruthless battle that changed the course of galactic history. Don't miss it. Unfortunately, both those within and outside the Sindel Confederation only managed to enjoy peace for a disappointingly brief period. To be fair, the humans were already starting to feel restless, with nothing to occupy them either on Earth or on the other planets within the Confederation. That's when the Mandarin expansion came crashing into Confederation space, striking with an overwhelming fury. In a matter of days, 3 agricultural worlds, once under the control of the now wealthy Nimi, were raided and devastated by the Mandarin. However, the Nimi weren't simply conquered. No, it was far more brutal than that. The Mandarin didn't just defeat them, they took a far more horrifying route. They slaughtered every Nimi they captured, slicing them open from chest to groin before exposing their bodies to a statue of their god which they had ready and waiting. The Mandarin resembled elves, though much taller, over 6 feet, with dark skin and eyes as red as freshly spilled blood. Despite their alien appearance, they also had fur-covered tough tails, similar to the Nimis, a fact they seemed to take personally after encountering this race on the planets they had claimed. The Mandarin's god, depicted with 6 arms, was represented in statues where the palms were always shown open, inviting the Mandarin to fill them with the organs, bones, heads, and limbs of their victims. This gruesome slaughter horrified the entire Sindel Confederation, especially since even their former enemies, the Dimir, showed more honor in combat than the Mandarin. The resulting panic caused the Confederation's forces to retreat, giving the Mandarin the false impression that they had become the new tyrants of the region. They reveled in this newfound power, raiding merchant posts and space lanes, even as traitors flooded their ranks. What they didn't know, however, was that the humans were on their way. The humans, armed with weapons capable of cutting through an Earth in an instant, were eager for a fight against such brutal foes. It was their preferred way of handling matters, as it meant they didn't need to show any mercy. The Mandarin, having believed that all humans had perished in the Darrier War, thanks to their religious leaders' proclamations, were completely unaware of the approaching human forces. The journey was slow, but the other members of the Confederation were left to try to hold the line in the meantime, waiting for the humans to arrive. The Mandarin quickly found that most of the Confederation forces lacked the fighting prowess to hold them off, with only the formidable Karlakan causing them any hesitation. According to enemy intel, the Mandarin saw the Confederation as a joke, considering their forces laughable. Meanwhile, nearly 50 million human warriors, each one from various regions on Earth, known as the War Wave, were making their way through space toward the battlefield. Earth itself still had 3 more war waves in reserve, made up of mostly new recruits who hadn't seen battle yet. These recruits included Layla, the Yal. The Mandarin held a kind of arcane teleportation technology that baffled even the Opticin, allowing them to fold space and travel across vast distances in a blink of an eye. While the current method of space travel was slow, requiring controlled bursts of near-light speed followed by engine cooldowns, the Mandarin's technology allowed them to skip through space in an instant, reappearing wherever they wished. It was bizarre and terrifying, but it was limited by the fact that only a couple thousand of the Mandarin were capable of such feats. They used this ability to raid and take sacrifices, and spacefaring races like the Opticin, Yal, and Point were vulnerable to their attacks. However, the Mandarin weren't ready for what awaited them in human space. These raiders were the first to meet the full might of humanity, as well as some unexpected allies. The alarm was deafening, far louder than Layla remembered it being. It was designed by humans to shock them out of sleep, and it was so spine-chilling that it immediately put Layla into fight or flight mode. "What's going on?" Layla screamed, jumping off her bunk and landing on her paws with a soft thud against the tiles. Zatan came rushing down the hall, his tail wrapped tightly around his waist to avoid tripping anyone. "Raiders! Raiders here!" he yelled, already pulling on his boots, despite being in nothing but his underwear. They unfolded right beside the quadra. First Sergeant Thompson called out, already in full uniform and placing his dark yellow honor beret on his head. "We're deploying immediately." Layla's hackles rose at the mention of the name, and she spun around to face the human quadra. "That's where the Nimi refugees are." "I'm aware," First Sergeant Thompson replied calmly, his beret's flash marking him as a battle-hardened veteran of numerous combat operations. The entire third company is deploying. You will all test your strength. Your iron and steel will taste blood for the first time. Himmel, struggling to get his pants on over his boots, looked up at Thompson in awe. We're combat dropping for real this time? No more training drops? No more training, First Sergeant Thompson said, turning to address the barracks room. You'll be dropping into an active combat zone under fire. The planetary security forces are doing their best to hold the line until we arrive, but they're reserves from the Carlin and Urel. They're already falling back. Get yourselves ready today. You'll earn the right to wear human assault armor. Pathetic, a smug voice came from Granger, who was cleaning the blood of various races from his glick blade. They had been hunting local security forces for days, and none of them had proven to be much of a challenge. Vassate looked over at the male Mandarin, raising an elegant eyebrow in response. The tail lashed behind her as she stared at the scene. What's pitiful? Venden sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Your father bought you the finest glick blade the armors could craft. Granger sighed dramatically, flicking his hands to rid them of the blood, glancing over at the slaughtered patrol they had just torn apart. It feels like overkill at this point, he mused. These Carlin are somewhat entertaining, but the Yal, one strike, and they fall apart. Honestly, deflector generators? It's childish. At least they fight, Morris spat, her tone sharp. Unlike those Harold Nemi. It's absurd, Granger shrugged, a smirk forming on his face. They even share the same kind of tail as us. Soon we'll wipe them from the stars, and then those nasty Poe will fall in line. Who do they think they are, with ears like ours? A voice crackled through Granger's comms. Blade Leader, it called. Granger pressed a finger to his earpiece, his posture perfect, his face smug. Yes, we have ships coming into range finalizing the last skips, the voice replied. Granger exhaled, glancing at Morris with a grin, his arms wide. More sacrifices are on their way. Morris looks like we may have to miss dinner pity. Morris, holding her spiking rifle, checked the harmonized crystal charges that served as its ammunition. We were having stew tonight, she muttered, eyes narrowing. This is Blade Leader Granger, rem to all units, Granger purred into the throat mic, his sultry tone cutting through the comms. More meat for our blades to savor, pull away from the main assault line, and arrange yourselves around the drop coordinates. We have work to do. Layla's stomach fluttered as she double-checked her ammunition pouches and extra magazines on her thigh armor. She had copied the loadout from the human veterans. There had been time to adjust her armor over the past few days in space, and now she wasn't sure if she wanted more time or less. They were to be led personally by First Sergeant Thompson, along with several other battle-hardened human veterans of the Damir War. Their faces were grim, yet they carried themselves like they were just heading into the office to clock in for a normal day. The heavy assault troops of the Third Company were arranged in the drop bay of the Big Mouth Bass, a human-inspired space dreadnought. The ship had a curious split down the middle leading to the hangar ahead of Layla. The assault pods were being loaded. Massive armored machines capable of carrying a 50-man platoon, with space for 2 vehicles in the middle. The pods were being loaded with ammunition belts that would feed the main cannons deployed on top, laying down suppressive fire as infantry disembarked down the ramps. These were called the Higgins Mark III. The pods launched from the ship with rattling speed, piloted by a Navy PRCP, Planetary Reentry Combat Pilot. They deployed multiple drag arrays to slow them down when they hit enough atmosphere, and once they were close enough to the ground, the pilot would engage the final landing engines, massive square thrusters, to decelerate rapidly and spin the craft if necessary. Despite being ships, they were called pods because they were designed solely for landing and had to be shuttled up to the dreadnought after the assault. Layla had been assigned to 4th Platoon, and she was a bundle of nerves. She had no idea where Himmel and Zayton were. This platoon was mostly made up of humans and Yal, and to her annoyance, all the female Yoral in the platoon were looking to her for guidance. First Sergeant Thompson took a deep breath as someone spoke to him from behind. A Navy shipman, judging by his uniform, Thompson nodded, pulling his helmet over his beret. A gesture Layla found odd, then activated the comms on his helmet. His voice boomed over the noise of the bay. Layla slipped her Yoral helmet on with practiced ease, her ears settling into place. The helmet hummed to life, displaying its armor rigidity and counting all her magazines, sidearm, explosives, and even her combat knife. This helmet was new, with her name etched on the side. The comm system came to life in her ear with a hiss as the plugs adjusted to the inside of her tall, fox-like ears. "Mount your ships!" First Sergeant Thompson called, and the entire 3rd Company stepped forward in unison, marching up the loading ramp. "The call of battle echoes to us, and we march to meet it," he said, his voice steady and commanding. It was taken as it came, with the loading racks arranged inside the pods. Layla sunk back into hers, the clasps on her armor snapping into place. She felt her new combat boots lift off the ground as the loading rack hoisted her up a few inches, its shock absorbers hissing gently. Her nerves buzzed with adrenaline as First Sergeant Thompson's voice came over the net again. "We face an enemy that offers neither mercy nor empathy," he growled into his mic, and Layla could hear the disgust in his voice. "They've come to kill in the name of their god, cutting down civilians without regard for morality. They've broken the Warriors' Covenant, so they have no rights to its protections. No prisoners, no quarter. We will scrub them off the face of this planet, then wash them from the stars, until not even their screams of agony survive." First Sergeant Thompson's words echoed through Layla's mind, making her heart pound in her chest. She could feel the line go dead, the air around her crackling with the tension of war fever, her ears trembling from the anxiety. This was something new for the Yao. They had never experienced battle the way the humans did. There was something about the humans' approach to war that stirred a frantic energy within the Ural. It made their blood hum and their nerves jitter with manic energy. Layla caught herself baring her fangs again, giving her head a slight shake, taking a deep breath to steady herself. Specialist Layla. Layla blinked, refocusing her gaze. Her eyes shifted to the left of her helmet display. This was another strange part of training, getting used to something so close to her face. On the internal display, she had asked why the helmets had a T-shaped visor and a certain distance from the eyes, and had learned that it was designed to be a good median range for all races, and it could be adjusted. "Specialist Layla," the gruff voice called again, and Layla blinked at the name displayed in the top right of her visor. "Yes, Sergeant Jacobs. You're leading a YAL squad. I'm putting them on your display." Layla tried to control her breathing as 12 names appeared on her display, each with their rank and the letters RFA beside them, indicating they were ready for action. "Arun," Layla called, her voice sharp. "What are you talking about?" A male voice, Terran's, called out into her ear. "We have to be out the ramp first." A female voice, huskier than usual, followed. It was Pierce. "Arun, we're by the left ramp, all of us." Layla blinked at her display, running through the options until it pulled up a map of the assault pod. Her circle and her squad were positioned beside the left drop ramp. "I see we have to be the first," she said, her mind working quickly. Terran shouted again, his voice brimming with excitement. "We'll be the first YAL ever to leave a human assault pod onto a combat field, side by side with humans. We'll make history." Layla chewed over the thought for a moment before blinking at her C selection, pulling Sergeant Jacobs back into view. "Sergeant Jacobs, yes. 4th Squad requests the honor of being first out the door," Layla said with professional resolve. Her heart was calming now. "Granted," Sergeant Jacobs replied without hesitation, and the line shut off as he relayed the message to the other NCOs. Layla saw another name light up on her helmet display, and a male human voice entered her ear. "3rd Squad will be right behind you. Clear the ramp and we'll follow you into hell." "Thank you, Sergeant Mitchell," Layla replied, holding back a waggle of her tail. She liked Mitchell. He treated all the Ural with respect, unlike some humans. "Don't thank me yet," Sergeant Mitchell replied with a laugh. "You'll be the first to get shot. It might as well rip off the Band-Aid." Layla smirked. "May as well," she said into her mic, a grin tugging at her lips. Mitchell's laughter echoed in response. An override voice cut through every helmet, including Layla's. The dockmaster's voice came in all at once. All Higgins-loaded personnel accounted for. No personnel found in the drop. A venting for launch. The dockmaster's tone was cool and precise as the drop pods were prepared. The ship's internal atmosphere was purged, sucking in all the oxygen before the vacuum of space was let in. The lights overhead shifted to match the time of day and the light levels on the surface. As morning arrived, it bathed the racks in red and orange light. "Unlocking drop pods for launch," the dockmaster said calmly, and the pods swung out into space on their long platforms, hanging beneath the ship like heavily armored bats, showing green from all perspectives. The launch cables engaged, and the Higgins Mark IIIs shuddered as the hooks tightened, pulling with enough force to launch the pods at over 300 miles per hour in just 5 seconds. Layla grinned. "First real ride," she said to herself. looking across the loading gangway at a large human man who nodded at her before giving her an odd wave, extending his thumb and pinky while keeping the 3 middle fingers tucked. They could only do this because their XC-1 Lancer rifles were strapped to their chests. Layla extended her fingers and gave him a waggle back. "Hell yeah, furry," the man said into her comms. "Let's get that ass." Layla snorted out a laugh, but quickly suppressed it as the dockmaster spoke up again. "All pods ready? Go for air, boss. Go for air, boss," Layla asked into her helmet. And just as she hissed in a breath, her stomach lurched. The assault pods of Third Company were all launched at once, speeding along the launch rails as fighters screeched out of their own hangar bays as escorts. Layla gritted her teeth as the pod gained speed, then exhaled sharply as they left the rails and hurtled through the void toward the planet below. "All pods launch green. Brace for thunder and take their souls," the dockmaster said, and the green lights beside every trooper's head turned amber. Layla had thought the descent would take longer, but the violent rumble of the assault pod hitting the atmosphere jolted her back to reality. The calm was unsettlingly silent as she looked around at the humans nearby. All their eyes were closed. None of them spoke, and they seemed unnervingly calm despite the chaos around them. "Aaron," Pierce's voice cut through Layla's ear. "The humans I don't know. Their lips are moving, and the one ahead of me is holding some little silver cross thing." Layla narrowed her eyes, trying to see the human who had given her the odd wave. She did her best to read his lips. He appeared to be holding something. An odd little necklace? Maybe a hammer? No, it looked like some sort of anchor. Then, her eyes caught a single word, one she vaguely recognized. It was a word she had heard murmured among humans during their religious meetings in the woods. "Tear." Or no, that's not it. "TR," she whispered to herself, her gaze fixed on the human's lips. He was speaking to TR, one of the human gods of war. Layla squeezed her eyes shut as the drag devices deployed, catching the atmosphere and making the assault pod shake harder than before. The racks rattled now, hissing and compensating to keep the cargo safe. The Yal didn't have gods. Of course, they were a people of science, not believing in anything they couldn't touch or explain. They didn't even believe in souls until they came into contact with the point. After meeting the Carlin and humans, they were struggling with self-doubt, questioning their worldview. As Layla plummeted toward Quadra's surface, she opened her eyes, gazing out toward the human ahead of her as he tucked his amulet back into his armor. Maybe, she thought quietly, maybe TR would watch over her and her people. She whispered the words, so soft they could only be heard by herself, perhaps by TR too, as she hoped the god of war would find her worthy. The assault pod shuddered with resolute resonations as the thrusters roared to life, decelerating so rapidly that Layla felt the G-forces pull at her fur and skin. The racks groaned as the pod slammed to the ground, reducing the impact to nothing more than a jarring jolt for those within. The racks clacked open, and Layla's armored paws hit the deck as she spun around. In a flash, she ripped her rifle from her chest and pounded down the gangway toward the drop ramp. "Find us worthy," Layla hissed under her breath, baring her fangs as the other Yoral gave their war cries, forming up behind her. Granger gave a short laugh. "Oh no, the poor fools, they've sent more Yorel? Now they're wearing new armor." "Harold," Harris said uneasily, crouching behind the other warriors. The Mandarin had staged themselves around the outskirts of the ruined town, crouched behind abandoned vehicles or huddling behind the broken stone walls. "It won't matter," Granger said, his voice dripping with contempt. He brought his rifle up, his targeting reticle locked on a vibrant orange crystal. "They break like poorly made pottery, and all they've done is offer more sacrifices to EOS." The orange streak shot through the air with a high-pitched shriek, and for a horrifying moment, Layla could actually track its flight toward her. To her shock, it collided with her chest plate and shattered, spraying orange particles into the air with a ringing streak. She jerked back slightly from the force of the impact, but her helmet's display assured her that her armor was still at 100% survivability. Her blood boiled with fury as she looked up, pinpointing where the round had come from. She pointed a bladed hand on the run, shouting into her comms, "Rip their souls from their bodies." Granger's arrogance faltered as he watched the round shatter off of Layla's armor, then twitched back as she pointed her hand at him. Her helmet's T-visor glittered in the morning sunlight. "That's surprising," Granger said quietly, turning to look at Harris, who was staring wide-eyed at the massive armored figures running down the ramps behind the YPAL. They wore the same type of armor. "Granger, how close are we to the human planet?" Harris screamed, grabbing the Mandarin by his hair. Granger howled in pain, snarling as he slapped her hand away. "How am I supposed to know? The War Spear told us to come to this planet to eradicate the Nimi. That's all I know, you EOS damned fool. May he strike you with all his hands." "Morris," Harris screeched. "They've brought the devastation of the Dimir with them, the mad butcherer of the stars." Granger's eyes went wide with horror. "That's impossible. They all died in the Dimir War. The Holy Hand had told us so. They've doomed us all, you." "Veteran!" Harris screamed, cutting her hand toward the troopers spilling out from the assault pods, deploying their cannons. "Cut them down! Hurry! Call in for an exile before they can fully deploy!" Sergeant Ma's XC-1 Lancer roared, barking out rapid bursts of fire as he moved, calling into his comms as multiple rounds either shattered or embedded themselves in his chest plate. "Solid munitions failing to penetrate machine guns, deploy! Pin them down! Layla, take your squad with 6 and flank that defilade!" Layla nodded, moving swiftly around a broken food cart, her IPAL squad and a group of humans following closely behind her. One Yoral let out a yelp of pain as an orange crystal embedded itself in her thigh, causing her to crash to the pavement and slide to a halt. "Metacon route, continue mission," a voice murmured in her ear. Layla turned just in time to see a massive human vaulting over a wall, his black skin exposed as he ripped off his gloves. "Copy!" Layla shouted, bringing her rifle to her eye just as dozens of Mandarin infantry came charging around a debris-littered corner in the road. "Contact!" Layla and her infantry pressed their triggers, releasing a barrage of fire that caused 3 Mandarins to jerk back, diving for cover. Others skittered to a halt, ducking behind broken sidewalk stalls and benches. "Split and flank!" Layla ordered, pointing her bladed hand to a firing position in front of them and then off to the side. The humans immediately sprinted off to execute the flanking maneuver, while the Goro took up the task of laying down suppressive fire, brazenly walking out into the open while hammering the Mandarin positions. The Mandarins did their best to fire back, their weapons designed to break through nearly any armor they encountered in space. But they were no match for the simple plate armor the humans wore. "Their armor is tough," a Yoral said through the squad sync. "Must be a polymer hybrid to allow them to move like that." One Mandarin pulled the cord on a plasma grenade and threw it toward the Yal, but Layla's helmet picked up on the weapon as soon as it was thrown, displaying an alert and highlighting it within an amber square. Layla lunged forward, snatching it out of the air, twisting her core to redirect it away from her infantry and tossing it into an empty stretch of road. "How?" a Mandarin veteran bellowed, ducking down behind a shattered vehicle leaking coolant and fuel. Layla quickened her pace, squeezing off single shots as she advanced on the cornered Mandarins. "Cease fire," Layla said calmly, waving her hand from side to side. The humans immediately engaged in melee, bayonets fixed to their rifles. The screams and shrieks of the Mandarins filled Layla's ears as her squad of IPAL rounded the corner to watch the chaos. Layla's helmet displayed that all the other squads were shattering the Mandarin infantry line like a bar of steel through glass. The Yal troopers rested their rifles on their shoulders, watching the humans scythe through the Mandarin swordsmen, whose blades struggled to even scratch the thick armor. "Ah, those are anti-shielding blades," Tur said, wincing inside his helmet as a large male human grabbed a Mandarin woman by her hair, her head exposed due to their pride in not wearing helmets. "They cut through like any kind of projector, just ignores them outright." The human didn't even bother using his bayonet. Instead, he casually twisted her head with a crisp crack of her neck, her screams of pain stopping suddenly as though someone had flicked a switch. She fell to the ground in a heap. "Rad," Terran muttered, watching a female human pin a male Mandarin to a car door with her bayonet. "Enemy flanking movement," Pierce called out, swinging her own XC-1 MG. The light machine gun let out a chattering report as she laid down fire on a squad of riflemen trying to reinforce their already fallen comrades. Many tripped over their own feet, face-planting into the asphalt as the rounds from the XC-1 MG shredded their bodies with tiny detonations. Layla and the other Yoral responded in kind, fanning out in an echelon formation as they steadily moved across the debris-littered road. The humans formed up behind them, shooting over their smaller infantry brethren and tearing the Mandarins to pieces before they could even react. Layla's helmet gave a light amber pulse, indicating that she only had 3 rounds left in her magazine. She performed a tactical reload with practiced ease, ramming the fresh magazine home and stashing the empty one in her dump pouch. Despite the bloodshed around her, she felt oddly calm, calmer than she thought she would be. "Specialist Layla, move your squad toward Point Echo," a voice called into her ear. It was Sergeant Mitchell. "We're pinned down by heavy weapons, flank them." "Copy," Layla said, waving her hand at those behind her. "Let's move out, Point Echo." A thin blue diamond appeared near the top of her visor, indicating the distance. She always found it amusing how particular the humans were about measurements. The Americans she had worked with preferred feet and pounds, while the Europeans insisted on using meters and kilograms according to the Americans. They used meters just to appease the Europeans, only to switch back to feet and pounds when they were home. "We're getting slaughtered down there." Granger howled into his throat mic, personally manning the splitter array. "They have humans here." "Yes, of course they're real humans, you idiot. Get those ships down here now." The splitter array was the only thing that seemed to slow the humans down, the weapon energizing the crystal shots inside, causing them to shatter before they could even make contact. Feet from where the targeting reticle designated, these weapons filled the air with splinters, exploiting the gaps in human armor, but even then, it only slowed them down. "I got one!" a veteran screamed, triumphantly dragging the helmeted head of a human along, holding it aloft. "Their neck is their weak point. Everyone's neck is a weak point," Granger screamed, ducking behind the gun shield of his splitter array as it was raked with machine gun fire. "We've only killed 6 of these bastards, and we've already lost nearly 100 warriors. What is going on? Are these veterans? Are they from the Demir War?" A cast center ducked low, running up beside Vendon, the 2 studs of his receiver headband glistening with the blood of their own species. "Ships are coming down finally!" Granger screamed, pulling out a pair of smoke generators from his raiding vest. "Let's get off this rock before those humans get any closer to us." "Navy is reporting ships coming in through Atmo. They're catching the scans," a radio man said, glancing at Sergeant Mitchell. "Sergeant, keep up the pressure. Layla is about to start her assault." "Copy," Sergeant Mitchell replied, nodding to the radio man. "When we see them react to that fire, we'll push. I'm tired of being held up here by whatever that exploding crystal launcher is. Tell everyone around us to get ready." Layla was just rounding the bend in the street when the alert pinged from Sergeant Mitchell. She quickly began issuing orders. "U6, go left and watch our entry. U6, go right and cover our 6. Keep your spacing along the sidewalk. Everyone else with me," Layla commanded, bringing her rifle optic to her eye as it fed her crucial information. In that moment, she felt an odd sense of ease. She had never felt this confident before. In many ways, wearing this human assault armor made her feel invincible, and she wondered to herself if this was how the ancient human knights felt when they charged toward the enemy lines. Her troopers walking in perfect sync with the humans around her made her heart swell with pride, but there was little time for pondering as she made her way down the middle of the street, and the enemy position opened up before her. Layla didn't hesitate. Her reticle traced along the bodies of the Mandarin as her shoulder barely shook with the recoil of her rifle. The Mandarins screamed in their hissing language and returned fire, but she didn't flinch. She remembered the days when she would have ducked down or flinched away from enemy fire, when the ground would shatter around her and orange streaks would tear through the air. After dozens of range visits with Drill Sergeant Marshall, this felt like child's play. She could still taste the sand in her teeth from those training sessions, and the ringing in her ears from Marshall firing rounds around her head seemed mild in comparison. "Cut in for the corner, Santana. Keep watching our 6. Make sure these hissing pricks don't flank us," Layla shouted, then began walking forward, her rifle hammering away 6 humans and 6 Ural formed up behind her, laying down suppressive fire. Crystals sang as they ricocheted off her armor or shattered against her legs. The blows took their toll on her knees and thighs, but the armor held up. The Mandarin seemed to be in full panic mode, unable to find any weak points in her armor. This was partly due to Layla's ability to track the orange crystals in the air, closing the gaps like she'd been trained. The only reason one of her own had caught a crystal earlier was due to a failure to close the gap in the first place. Layla still carried a small grudge against Staff Sergeant Krams, who never failed to rattle her ribs with his sniper rifle shots. As the Mandarins turned to face their rear flank, everyone else pushed up, raining hell down on the cover that was their only lifeline. Then there was a pause. 4 raiding cutters descended from the sky, showering the Mandarins with orange crystals. This seemed to give them a boost, But their celebration was short-lived. Rockets streaked up from the ground, raining on their parade as the Mandarins were clearly unprepared for surface-to-air heat warheads. The raiding cutters crumpled like tinfoil, disintegrating in midair before exploding in a fireball of metal, debris, and personnel. The detonations rattled the ground beneath Layla's boots, but she remained unfazed. "Sergeant Mitchell, we're fixing bayonets. Watch your fire," Layla called out, pulling out her nearly sword-length bayonet and locking it into place on her lug. All of her troopers followed suit, while the humans, still armed with theirs, kept their bayonets locked in place. "Clear for charge," Sergeant Mitchell said in reply. "Charge!" Layla bellowed into her helmet, taking off in a sprint, her mustard-yellow tail fluttering behind her. The roar of her troopers filled her ears as they too charged forward. Layla cleared a broken concrete wall of a smoothie shop with ease, landing on her paws and drop-kicking a pompous-looking Mandarin into the shield of a large gun. Layla was then suddenly thrown back onto her feet by a human who hooked her under the armpit and lifted her skyward, allowing her to keep her offensive momentum. A Mandarin slashed at her with a strange sword, but it barely made a dent in her armor. A shallow groove ran along Layla's breastplate, making her helmet flash a heat warning. Before a particularly mean-looking female Mandarin could react, Layla lunged forward, her rifle raised, and buried her bayonet straight through the eye socket of the Mandarin. The blade ripped through the back of his skull with a sickening wet sound, spraying a spatter of pearly blood and brain matter. Oddly, their brains were also white, and Layla made a mental note of that Pierce backhanded her own Mandarin with the butt of her rifle before plunging her bayonet deep into his chest. Meanwhile, Terran simply beat his Mandarin to death with his fists, the armor breaking apart as he pummeled her face, the sound of cracking bone echoing through the air. Layla found it strange that their armor was so weak, but then remembered that these point-like people probably used the same type of armor as her own species, along with some strange hybrid polymers. As her squad continued to bludgeon, stab, and slash their way through the rear of the Mandarin position, Sergeant Mitchell and the rest of the team charged in from the front, effectively sandwiching the remaining Mandarins between two walls of unyielding infantry. True to the word of their first sergeant, no quarter was given, and no mercy was shown. By the time Layla was done, she was breathing heavily, her armor spattered with thick rivers of pearly blood that gleamed in the morning light. She had taken a few more slashes, even a stab from an actual knife, but her armor had done its job, pumping her full of painkillers and deploying tiny bio-robots that patched up her wounds. The worst part, however, was the itching as the little bots worked to fuse her wounds together, irritating her flesh like 1,000 tiny pinpricks. For her first combat, Layla didn't lose a single trooper, and she found herself sitting on a low wall, surrounded by dead Mandarins. She removed her helmet, her fur sticking out at odd angles. Her ears would need to be brushed, and her leg muscles screamed in protest. But at that moment, she had never felt more alive or more satisfied. Looking around at her fellow Yorel, she could see their eyes shining with a newfound understanding of how war truly was. The humans around them were fist-bumping, celebrating with themselves, the PO, the IPAL, and the Carlin. Even a few hugs were exchanged, especially with the Jinn, as they were all still fresh recruits who had survived their first mission. As small details filtered through her exterior earpiece, Layla learned that there had been some fatalities, though they were light compared to the hundreds of dead Mandarins lying around. The rest of the Mandarins fled on the ships that had survived. Sergeant Mitchell sat down next to Layla, then rustled her hair with a laugh, eliciting an annoyed yell from her. "Hey, watch it, First Sergeant. I'm going to have to brush it out enough as it is," Layla chided, playfully smacking the human's hand away. Sergeant Mitchell smiled at her, his voice steady. "Good work today, Layla. You got in some solid kills. The drones even caught some of the footage." "Drones?" Layla asked, suddenly feeling nervous. She had stomped on the face of a female Mandarin after the woman had stabbed her with a knife, and she wasn't sure how pretty that footage would look. "Snack," Sergeant Mitchell said, holding out half of his candy bar. "Gotta eat something nice after your first mission." Layla raised an eyebrow at the human but shook her head, taking the offered half of the candy bar. "Of course you humans would feel the need to eat at a time like this. You're alive, and only the living get to enjoy food." "Food?" Sergeant Mitchell said, kicking the long-cooled body of a Mandarin. "This poor thing can't enjoy it anymore, so we better do it while we can." Layla pursed her lips, glancing down at the body before shrugging and taking a bite of the candy bar. Yeah, I suppose you have a point. I'd prefer pizza, though. I'm sure we can get some pies going once we're back up on the ship, Corporal Sergeant Mitchell said, grinning devilishly as he watched Layla cough in surprise, the Ural accidentally inhaling a piece of the wafer bar into her lungs.